My colleague Brad Lusk is not only a water scientist, but also a science fiction enthusiast and expert. So who better to give us a crash course on fictional water technologies that became fact? Here's Brad.
Hey everyone, my name's Brad Lusk, and I'm here today to talk to you about water in space. IL Utilities is participating in something called the Aqualunar Challenge. And essentially what this program is doing is contemplating how we're going to wrap our heads around having sustainable access to water on Earth by leveraging some of the technologies that are being developed to conserve water in outer space. It's really important and kind of cool to think about all of the ways that water has captured our imagination within sci-fi and the scientific community. Obviously, there's a lot of water research we do on Earth, but water has played a big role in a lot of the science fiction that has piqued our imagination and made us think about what the next frontier might look like. In outer space, you have very limited access to resources. You have to imagine you're up in your space station or on your spaceship, and it's very important to utilize and recycle as much of those resources as you possibly can. If you're up in a spaceship and you don't have access to an entire planet, you really need to think about every drop of water or element that is contained in your pee, in your poop, in the food, in the air, the phosphorus, the nitrogen, the oxygen, the water. All of these different compounds are going to be very important because you're essentially in an enclosed, self-sustained pod. And so we need to think about how it is we can use some of these technologies that we're developing for space to be implemented on Earth as water and these resources become scarcer. In the movie Waterworld, the polar ice caps have melted, causing massive flooding, and it's really hard to find land, and thus it's really hard to find drinkable water. There's a very famous scene in this movie where Kevin Costner's character is out on his boat and uses a miniature desalination and filtration system to capture, filter, and drink his own pee. Despite this kind of viscerally disgusting image of someone drinking their own pee, it does help the audience to imagine the kind of innovative technologies that can be created to help us conserve and sustain life when access to fresh water is limited. This situation parallels a lot of the technology that we've developed in the real world. When we're thinking about regions of the world that are becoming more drought-stricken, or the groundwater is becoming inundated with seawater due to coastal erosion, we think about places using desalination technology or planned potable reuse for recycling water. Places like the west coast of the United States or Israel, where a lot of cutting-edge desalination technology and planned potable reuse is planned or occurring. We also see these kinds of technologies being implemented across industries like manufacturing, food and beverage, power plants, and data centers, where recycled water is filtered before it is introduced to cooling towers, greatly diminishing the demand for fresh water. On the International Space Station, solid and liquid wastes are separated. Separating solid and liquid waste is important because it allows the liquid waste to be recycled into drinkable water. If you imagine a future in which humans are traveling to or occupying other worlds, separating solids and liquids also simplifies the nutrient recovery process. Essential nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus can be recovered from the liquid fraction while producing drinkable water for the astronauts, while the solid fraction can be converted into biosolids and used for sustainable agriculture, as we saw in The Martian. Although much of our plumbing infrastructure mixes solids and liquids as a consequence of being developed over 100 years ago, separating solids and liquids to recover valuable nutrients and biosolids here on Earth is becoming increasingly a more common practice. Another example we can think of is Luke Skywalker's character in Star Wars. Luke Skywalker is a farmer. I think a lot of people know that. But what's interesting is the kind of farmer that Luke Skywalker is. Luke Skywalker is a moisture farmer. He harvests water from the air on Tatooine using something called an atmospheric water generator that harnesses solar energy to condense water vapor into liquid water. Basically, the water that's in the air is now able to be captured, recovered, and consumed. Perhaps George Lucas made Luke a water farmer in the middle of the desert to provide foreshadowing for Luke as the savior of the Republic. He's the person that provides water, the substance essential for life, against all odds, in the middle of a drought, in the middle of a desert, and in the middle of an intergalactic battle for the cosmos. Obviously, technology for harvesting water from air at scale is very expensive compared to, say, groundwater or using recycled water from a wastewater treatment plant. However, when you're thinking about inhabiting extremely remote locations, extremely arid lands, places like Tatooine or a space station on Mars or the Moon or some other celestial body that has humidity in the air, you can see how very quickly the economics start to reverse. The cost of shipping a liter of water from Earth to Mars becomes astronomically expensive, whereas the cost of using something like solar power to condense water vapor from the air in a remote location becomes extremely cost-effective. As you all are listening to some of the technologies that we're talking about today from the Aqualunar program, I encourage you all to stay innovative, to stay creative, and to think about ways to transform your ideas into tangible realities. The theoretical situations we entertain ourselves with in sci-fi and space travel are exactly the situations that get us contemplating blue sky thoughts that might lead to the next breakthrough. Perhaps to occupy new worlds, or perhaps to provide the next leap in water innovation here on Earth.
Brad, thank you. That was unbelievably cool.